All right, Jake and John here from the Beer and Business Podcast. Geez, you start with the thing.
Yeah, why not?
We are drinking one of our favorite styles of beer, IPA.
That's right.
And the style of IPA beers is quite a mystery. And so we're going to take some time today to try to decloud some of the mystery around IPAs. Right?
Good. Yeah.
At least I think that's what we're going to do.
So you know what to look for when you go in the store.
So we'll give it the old college try. The first thing we got to do is we have to identify what is an IPA. Because even that, I think, is a little bit misleading and maybe not everybody's thought through it.
Right.
So there's two basic types of beer. There's ales and there's lagers. And simply put, the difference between the two of them is the type of yeast that's used to ferment the beer. And so lagers, actually, the yeast, it ferments at a lower temperature.
Right.
And so that results in a little bit of a cleaner, crisper tasting beer. And then ales, obviously, they're at a higher temperature when they ferment, and they come out tasting a little fruitier, a little estery, which can have kind of earthy tones to it. So those are the two basic types of beer. So you have ale. So what makes a pale ale and what makes an India pale ale, which is our IPA? Going to confuse it even more. So we have to take a look back in history, Mister Winnie, to understand this.
All right, we do.
So pale ales were developed using different malts than some of the other ales, like stouts and porters. And what happened is you got a lighter color. So it was a pale colored ale. So it's a pale ale.
Right.
But the India pale ale came about when the British were sending beer to their troops in India. This was back in the 1700s, 1800s.
Yeah, before refrigeration.
Before refrigeration.
Yeah.
And in order to keep the beer fresh, what they did was they put more hops in it. So it was generally thought that if you put more hops in it, it will preserve the beer.
More alcohol. So
you had more alcohol and you had more hops. And that became an India pale ale because they were sending it to India.
Very
so
good.
Generally speaking, an India pale ale is basically a pale colored ale that's got a higher bitterness. So that's measured by the IBUs or the International Bitterness Unit. It's got a higher IBU than a pale ale, and it's got a higher alcohol content than a pale ale. So that's generally the difference. Now, what's that line between pale ale and IPA? Well, it's kind of blurry, and it's not perfect science.
Right. It's up to the brewer.
Yeah.
Hit their interpretation.
Right.
So you go to the store, right?
Yep.
You want an IPA, or there's some keywords on the cans, some labeling you need to pay attention to. There's a double IPA or triple IPA even.
And what is that?
That's just basically just double the hops.
And it's not a style.
Right.
So we love double IPAs, but it's just more of the good stuff.
Sure. There's more hops, there's more malt, and usually more alcohol. So.
And also double IPAs will be referred to as imperial IPAs sometimes. Same thing. The word's interchangeable.
Okay. Yeah. There's a fresh hop or wet hop brewed beer, which means that the hops are fresh. You have to within 24 hours they have to use them.
Boil.
Right. So
it's not very practical. You don't see a lot of them.
Yeah.
But they're very delicious because they're super fresh hops. Because 99+% of beer
is freeze dried.
Yeah, it's got the little pelletized hops. Well,
which is fine, but
it's great. But fresh hop,
very expensive to brew a wet hop. So
yummy.
You got another word to look for is hazy. That's kind of
That's how you feel after you.
Yeah, no,
not
when I woke up this morning. But hazy IPA is just it's cloudy, really. I mean,
that's it, right?
Yeah,
just a description of what it looks like.
Right. Whether they decided to filter it or not, or it just.
And I think that's one of the key misnomers on hazy. Like when you see hazy beers, people assume that it's not filtered. Well, a lot of hazy beers are filtered, actually.
Sure, yeah.
They might use a different yeast that creates that coloration or something like that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's your session IPA, which basically is just a lower alcohol content, a little easier, lighter drinking.
Yeah.
You can sit down for a long session.
A nice long session of drinking beers. And you can have multiple.
Yep.
So it's important that we cover those terms first, Mr. Winnie, because you'll actually see beers marketed as double IPA or hazy IPA or session.
Right.
But that's not the style. So we want to go through the actual styles of IPA because I think this will help consumers figure out what it is they're actually drinking and what they like. So let's start. What's the first type of IPA, Mr.
It'd be
Wayne?
an English/British IPA, which is the original IPA, right?
British sending their beer to the troops in India.
Yeah, it's just, a simple, it's a, malty, bitter, not too many flavor notes in it.
Yeah, it's just really single dimensional.
Just your basic beer.
And we want to give examples of all these that might be, should be distributed around you. So if you wanted to try an example, you could. Right. So a good example of a British IPA
is Goose Island. Goose Island IPA. Yeah.
Goose Island's a great one. It's a very simple, straightforward British IPA. Mm-hmm. Next came what really sparked the craft beer revolution in the United States, and that is the West Coast IPA, or you'll also hear to it referred as an American IPA. So American IPA and West Coast IPA really can be used interchangeably because it's the same style. And essentially what happens with an American IPA, that's what makes it different than a British, is you get more fruit flavors coming through.
Right.
And different hops, some of them actually using different fruit juices in there, or they just brew it differently to where that comes out rather than a single dimensional flavor. You get the bitterness of the hops, you get the maltiness, you get the fruit flavor. And these are kind of a little bit cleaner and maybe a little bit more crisp than a British style IPA. They've got higher carbonation, and usually that fruit flavor that you'll pick up is kind of a tropical note or a citrusy note. Okay. And a good example of this, one of the originals that really, like we said, sparked the craft beer revolution in the U.S. is Torpedo Extra IPA from Sierra Nevada. So it's called Extra IPA. Extra doesn't mean anything. It's just the name of it. Right. It's a West Coast style IPA, and it's a really good example of one.
Yep, it is. Next example will be a Belgian IPA. The driving flavor in a Belgian IPA just is from the yeast. Yep. The certain type of yeast they have. It provides a sweet, bready, warm note to the beer.
Hello.
Yeah.
Love those Belgians and their yeast.
Yep. That's really the only difference, I guess.
And the flavor profile is kind of like a British IPA mixed with like a triple. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get both of those dimensions in the same beer, and they're very easy to drink. So for somebody that is like, I don't like really hoppy beers, or it's a good type of beer for them to experiment with if they're wanting to try to broaden their horizons.
Right.
So what's a good example?
A couple of these is Little Something, which that's Lagunitas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's a great Belgian IPA. Right. Very easy to drink.
Yes.
Delicious.
I've had a few.
Yeah, just a few.
What's next?
New England IPA. So, New England IPA is actually different than an American IPA or a West Coast IPA. And this has actually become kind of the stepping stone between the British IPA and the West Coast IPA. Mm-hmm. Let's just make it complicated. Right. And what you see here in a New England IPA is an emphasis on that piney hop flavor. Mm-hmm. You can get it in both the smell of the beer and also in the taste. And it's got a real solid malt backbone. And it's not as bright as, let's say a West Coast IPA. So a West Coast IPA, when you drink it, you'll immediately get this kind of rush of flavor on the front end. You don't really get that with a New England. It's kind of lazy on the front end and then kind of hits you later. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely more complex than a British IPA, which is very single-dimensional in its flavor. Right. And a good example of that is aptly named New England IPA from Sam Adams. It's actually a really good one.
Right. Absolutely. Good stuff. Next one is a black IPA, which is pretty rare, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. We've had one on the show.
Okay.
But yeah, they're very hard to find.
It's an American style IPA or West Coast style, but it's brewed with darker malts and
those are basically the malts that are used for like a stout or a porter.
Right. Yep. So let's see. You need a brewing. That's the one we.
Uinta.
You
gotta say it right.
This is Jake's notes.
Now it's my notes.
Uinta Brewing. Well, how do you say that?
Doobie.
It looks like
come on, it's from the West. No, it's Doobie. Come on, man. But it's not spelled like Doobie, like the Doobie Brothers, or like smoking a doobie. They spell it weird. But
Right.
that is one that you could probably get your hands on.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Winnie's right. That's actually a very difficult beer to find.
Right.
We're finding a lot of craft beer breweries are doing these in their tap rooms, so maybe not for distribution. So, if you go to your store and try to pick one up off the shelf, you'll probably have a difficult time. But you can't find them. I'm not a fan, honestly. I think that they're two flavor profiles that don't mix well.
Right.
If I want a stout, I want a stout. And if I want an IPA, I want an IPA. I don't think they play well together, but,
yeah, not really.
That's just my opinion. Some people like them. Next one is one that's really caught on as of late, and that is a Milkshake IPA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Milkshake IPA is really interesting. They actually get their nickname Milkshake because they use milk sugars, and that's where the beer gets an additional layer of sweetness. And they've become really interesting. A lot of breweries. We're in Georgia. We're in the Atlanta area, and a lot of local breweries are really experimenting with these Milkshake IPAs, and I'm sure they probably are wherever you're watching. They're really good. You'll see fruit added to them. A lot of them use vanilla to kind of accentuate that creamy texture. They're a lot of fun. They're not all-day drinkers. These are kind of like one and done.
Right.
You have one, it's a great experience. You're probably going to drink it slow, and then you're like, okay, I need something a little lighter.
Very heavy.
They are very heavy, and most of them have really high alcohol content. Typically in the 8 to 10% on single IPAs that we've had. Very good. We actually could not find a national example, but we actually interviewed the founders of Monday Night Brewing a few weeks ago, and they were actually talking about a beer called Piranha Dealer. Remember them talking about that? Yeah. That's actually a Milkshake IPA. Right. So chances are you could probably find one at a local brewery in your area.
Very cool. Next one is fruited IPA. It's basically, it is what it sounds like. They just throw in, while they're brewing it, they throw in a whole bunch of fruit, pureed fruit, into the beer while it's brewing.
Which is different than a West Coast IPA where they may actually not use any fruit in it. They're just throwing hundreds of pounds of fruit in.
Right. Yeah, very strong fruity notes in that beer. But with fruited IPAs, you want the fruit puree added to the beer. They can't just use fruit juice. Yeah. Because it won't give you the same flavor profile.
Yeah, because if you don't, it kind of comes a little later in the aftertaste. You taste like a little bit of a fruit. But if you drink a fruited IPA, like the fruit hits you right up front.
Right. Yep.
And depending on the type of fruit, like that's something that could turn me off as a beer drinker. But there are some that are actually pretty good. And our national example is actually a really good one. Okay.
The Aprihop
Dogfish Head.
Have we reviewed that one? I don't think
we haven't reviewed it, but I've drank it before. Okay. And you taste the apricot right up front, but it's such a soft fruit and it's done so well that it doesn't really turn you off. But I've had some like, raspberry IPA where as soon as you take a drink, it's like, whoa, tons of fruit, a little too much in my opinion, but to each his own. And sometimes it could be fun as just an experimental and different beer. Now the next two styles of beer are very similar. With some subtle differences, and both of them are very new and gaining steam in terms of popularity. And those two styles are Brut IPA and Brut IPA. So Brut IPA is brewed with a yeast called Brettanomyces. Say that 5 times fast. Go ahead. It's difficult. They actually use this yeast in making wine. And so what that does is that actually brings out a little bit more of a fruity flavor, but it's not fruity as in kind of a fruited IPA or West Coast IPA. It actually comes across like more of a musky or a dank tasting fruit. So it's a different experience, and it's actually really interesting. They're a lot of fun to drink. So it's not what you'd think it is. It tastes more like fruit that you'd taste in wine versus a fruit that you'd taste in like a fruited IPA. So it comes through differently. Yep. And a good example of this is Allagash Brewing. They have one that they call Brut IPA. So it's BRETT. So give that one a shot if you can get your hands on Allagash. Allagash is pretty widely available.
Yeah, I need to find some of that.
And that's just a style that's really trending. But then you've got Brut IPA, which is spelled like the cologne, B-U-R-T, or the champagne. Right. And Brut IPA is made with an enzyme called amyloglucosidase. Again, say that 5 times fast.
Yep.
Now, amyloglucosidase, I think you can only say it twice in one day and then you're done.
Right.
What it does is it actually breaks down sugars that typically wouldn't ferment.
Right.
So you can get more fermentation. You can get your alcohol content with less sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is that creates a drier finish, and it finishes like a champagne or, a wine. And so that's where it got its name, Brut IPA. This is really getting popular.
Yeah.
And that enzyme that they use, are starting to use in imperial stouts.
Mm-hmm.
So to get those real big boozy imperial stouts without getting the fruit flavor. So they need to get every little bit of sugar out of there if they can. So those are a lot of fun. I like these a lot. One that I'm sure you could find, Sierra Nevada actually makes one, and it's called
Brut
IPA. So easy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's a lot of styles. And
a lot of good info there.
There's even more. Like there's a lot of stuff that's being done in experimentation. Like people are messing around with sour IPAs, oat IPAs, and other stuff too. And so I think you're going to see these continue to expand. But it's important to know the difference between those key words and the styles.
I think we've explained it pretty good.
We have. So there's a takeaway. There's a takeaway for consumers, and there's a takeaway for brewers. So for consumers, you may have tried an IPA and you don't like it, or maybe you do like IPAs, but you like some and you don't like others. Well, here's the thing. Try to figure out what kind of style of IPA it is, which is not always easy because a lot of cans aren't labeled.
Right.
I'm drinking an IPA right now where the can says it's a double IPA. Okay, well, what style?
Right.
It doesn't say. So figure out what style of IPA you like. Take your top 3 or 4 and figure out what you're gravitating towards, and then try to drink those. Mm-hmm. Or if you don't like IPAs, try a bunch of different types, and I guarantee you'll probably find one that suits you. Absolutely. If you like beer, and then you'll know, okay, I'm going to try that one. So, somebody, the first time they tried an IPA may have tried a West Coast IPA, and it was big and hoppy and, really high on the bitter scale, and they're like, I don't like IPAs. Right. But maybe if they tried a Belgian IPA, they'd go, ooh, that's really good. Yeah. So for consumers, take note of this style because that could help you figure out what you like. And for brewers, for God's sake, label your freaking packages. Yeah. Tell people what it is and make sure it tastes like what you say.
Be honest with it. Because, that your double IPA here, Alpha Abstraction, tastes nothing like a Sam Adams Rebel Rouser double IPA.
Right.
They both say double IPA in the label, but they're completely different styles. Yeah.
And we've actually reviewed beers on our show that were IPAs, but they didn't taste like IPAs at all, or certainly didn't taste like the style that they said they were. So for brewers, have some discipline in the style because I think that's only going to help you as a brewery and help consumers be educated on what it is they actually like.
Yep. Sure.
So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it's been educational. There's a lot to learn with IPAs, but I assure you there's one out there for you. So thanks for tuning in, and check out our podcast. If you haven't listened to it, go to your favorite podcast app. Just search for Beer and Business, and we'll see you soon.
See ya.
Do your